I still remember the exact moment I knew I would destroy him. It wasn't when he took credit for my project in front of the board. It wasn't even when he accidentally spilled coffee on my laptop the day before our biggest presentation. No, it was the look in his eyes when he thought he'd won. That smug, self-satisfied glimmer that said he believed himself untouchable. That's when I decided I wouldn't just reclaim what was mine. I would systematically dismantle everything he thought he owned, including his corner office with the view of the city skyline that should have been mine all along. You see, in the corporate jungle of Helix dynamics, there's an unwritten rule: eat or be eaten. I had played by the rules for 7 years, arrived early, left late, sacrificed weekends and relationships. I was the model employee, the one who pulled impossible projects from the brink of disaster, the one who should have been sitting in the chief operating officer's chair instead of watching Simon Foster steal it from under me with nothing but charm, connections, and a remarkable talent for taking credit for other people's work. But that was about to change, because what Simon didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been documenting everything. Every stolen idea, every manipulated figure, every private conversation where he'd disparaged colleagues to curry favor with those above him. And now, after being passed over for the 3rd time while Simon collected another promotion he didn't deserve, I had finally decided to use it all. Revenge, like the best business strategy, requires patience, precision, and perfect timing. I'd waited long enough. It was time for Simon to learn that the quiet ones, the watchers, the note-takers, the loyal workers who fade into the background, they're the ones you should fear the most. My name is Claire Reynolds, and this is how I took back everything that was stolen from me, and then some. It began on a Monday. Most significant things do. The office was buzzing with news of another major client acquisition, and Simon was strutting around like a peacock, collecting congratulations for work he hadn't done. "Reynolds," he called as he spotted me by the coffee machine. "Just the person I wanted to see. We need to discuss the Meridian proposal. My office. 10 minutes. I nodded, the perfect picture of deference. "Of course, Simon." He didn't even wait for my complete response before turning away, already moving on to someone more important. That was Simon's way. People were only valuable to him in proportion to what they could do for his career. 10 minutes later, I knocked on his door, the Meridian folder clutched in my hand. The proposal I'd spent the last 3 weeks perfecting while he was networking at golf courses and expensive restaurants. "Come in," he called, not looking up from his computer. The corner office that should have been mine was decorated with awards he'd claimed for projects he'd barely contributed to. My work, my ideas, displayed like trophies on his shelves. I sat down across from him, waiting as he made a show of finishing an email. Finally. He looked up. "The Meridian proposal," I said, sliding the folder across his desk. He flipped through it carelessly. "Looks good. I'll present it to the board tomorrow." "Actually," I said carefully, "I thought I might present it this time, since I've been working directly with their team for the past month." Simon laughed, as if I'd told a mildly amusing joke. "Claire, you know these board presentations are delicate. They expect to see someone at my level. But don't worry, I'll be sure to mention your contribution." By mention my contribution, he meant he would include my name in a rapid-fire list of team members on the last slide, if he remembered it all. "Of course," I said, smiling tightly. "Just thought I'd ask." "That's what I've always liked about you, Claire. You're ambitious." He said it like it was a character flaw he graciously overlooked. But sometimes you need to recognize where you fit in the ecosystem here. I knew exactly where I fit. I just didn't plan on staying there much longer. "Speaking of which," he continued, "I need you to run point on the Wilson account. They're not a big client, but they could be a good learning opportunity for you." Translation: the Wilson account was a mess. The client was notoriously difficult, and there was little chance of success. But if by some miracle I turned it around, Simon would claim strategic oversight. If it failed, it would be entirely my fault. "Happy to take it on," I said. "Great." He was already looking back at his computer. Dismissal complete. I walked out, closed the door behind me, and headed straight to my desk. There, tucked in my bottom drawer beneath performance reviews and company handbooks, was a small black notebook. I opened it and added today's date, followed by Meridian Proposal, Complete Theft of Credit Imminent, Wilson Account, Potential Sacrificial Setup. The notebook was nearly full now. 3 years of careful documentation, times, dates, witnesses, evidence, but it wasn't quite time to use it. The moment had to be perfect. That night, I stayed late, as usual. The office emptied out, the cleaning crew came and went, and still I worked. Not on the Wilson account, that could wait. Instead, I was putting the final touches on a different project. My project. When you plan to take down the second most powerful person in a company, you need leverage, you need allies. Most importantly, you need to be indispensable. For the past year, I'd been quietly developing a client management system that would streamline our entire workflow. A system I'd built on my own time, using my own resources, carefully documented as such to avoid any company ownership claims. A system that would save Helix Dynamics millions annually, if implemented correctly. And tomorrow, I would begin phase 1 of my plan, becoming absolutely essential to the company's future. I arrived at 6:30 a.m. the next morning, a full hour before even the earliest executives. I'd scheduled a meeting with our IT director, Roland Park, for 7 a.m. Roland was a brilliant technician who had been overlooked for promotion multiple times, another victim of Simon's political machinations. He'd been relegated to maintaining systems rather than innovating them, which was where his true talent lay. "Morning, Claire," Roland said as he entered the conference room, coffee in hand, looking surprised to see the spread of pastries I'd brought. "What's so important that we're meeting at the crack of dawn?" "I want to show you something," I said, opening my laptop. "But first, I need your absolute confidence." Roland raised an eyebrow but nodded. We'd worked together for years, and while we weren't friends exactly, there was mutual respect. For the next hour, I walked him through my client management system. By the time I finished, Roland was leaning forward, his coffee forgotten. "This is impressive," he said finally. "More than impressive. This could revolutionize how we handle client data. Why are you showing me this and not—" He stopped, but I knew he was going to say, "Simon." "Because I want to implement it properly," I said. "And I need someone who actually understands systems architecture." I paused. "Also, because I know you've been stuck maintaining outdated systems when you should be building new ones." Roland studied me carefully. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A partnership," I said. "I've designed the system, but I need your expertise to integrate it seamlessly. We present it together to the executive committee, not the board, not Simon, but directly to CEO Victoria Winters and CFO David Larson. When it succeeds, we both get the credit. And the recognition? And Simon?" I smiled. "We'll have to explain why he didn't identify such an obvious opportunity for improvement under his direct supervision." Roland's expression changed as he understood what I was really offering. A chance to bypass the man who had stalled his career. "I'm in," he said, "but Victoria and David are notoriously hard to get on the calendar." "Leave that to me," I replied. Phase 1 was in motion. Getting a meeting with the CEO and CFO required a specific strategy. Direct requests would be filtered through their assistants and likely redirected to Simon. Instead, I used my relationship with Victoria's executive assistant, Lydia. Over the years, I'd made a point of befriending the executive assistants, not in a calculating way, but genuinely. I remembered their birthdays, asked about their families, helped them when they were overwhelmed. These were the people who truly ran the company, though few executives recognized it. "Lydia," I said, stopping by her desk later that morning with her favorite latte. "How's Ben doing with his college applications?" Her face lit up as she told me about her son's prospects. After a few minutes of genuine conversation, I casually mentioned I had something that might interest Victoria. "It's a new client management system, completely proprietary. It could save the company close to $3 million annually in reduced redundancies alone." Lydia looked intrigued. She's focused on cost-cutting measures for the quarterly report. Exactly, I said. This isn't just a minor improvement. We're talking about a complete transformation of our client relationship workflow. Does Simon know about this? She asked. I gave her a knowing look. I'd prefer to present it directly to Victoria and David first. Fresh eyes. Lydia had been at Helix long enough to understand the politics. I might be able to get you 15 minutes at the end of their strategy meeting on Thursday, she said. But you'll need to make it count. 15 minutes is all I need, I assured her. As I walked away, I felt Simon's eyes on me from across the office. He had seen me talking with Lydia and was already suspicious. Good. Let him wonder. The next 2 days were a careful balance, working diligently on the Wilson account during regular hours, then staying late to refine my presentation with Roland. We worked well together, his technical expertise complementing my strategic vision. Thursday arrived, and I dressed with particular care. A charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, subtle but expensive jewelry. Power dressing matters when you're about to challenge the established order. At 4:45 p.m., Roland and I walked into the executive conference room. Victoria Winters, a formidable woman in her 50s who had built Helix from a small consulting firm to a major player, looked up from her papers. Claire, isn't it, from Simon's team? She asked. Yes, Ms. M. Winters, thank you for seeing us. This is Roland Park from IT. David Larson, the CFO, checked his watch. Lydia says you have something that could save us millions. You have 15 minutes to convince us. I didn't waste a second. What if I told you we could reduce client response time by 78%, eliminate data redundancy across departments, and provide real-time analytics on client satisfaction and project profitability? For the next 12 minutes, Roland and I presented our system with precision and passion. Victoria asked sharp questions, which we answered confidently. David focused on the cost savings, impressed by the detailed projections. And Simon Foster is on board with this? Victoria asked finally. The pivotal moment had arrived. I met her gaze directly. This initiative was developed independently, I said carefully. Roland and I believed it was important to present it directly to you first, given its potential impact on the company's bottom line. Victoria and David exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. I'd like to see a pilot program, Victoria said finally. 1 month, 3 key clients. If the results match your projections, we'll discuss full implementation. And who will oversee this pilot? David asked. Before I could respond, the conference room door opened, and Simon walked in as if he'd been invited. Sorry I'm late, he said smoothly, though he hadn't been expected at all. Traffic was terrible. I kept my expression neutral, but internally, I was calculating rapidly. Someone had tipped him off, probably his own source among the executive assistants. Simon, Victoria acknowledged. We were just discussing a new client management system that Claire and Roland have developed. Simon's smile never faltered, but I saw the flash of anger in his eyes. Ah, yes, the project I've been mentoring them on. I'm pleased they finally brought it to your attention. The audacity was breathtaking. He was claiming oversight of a project he'd heard about minutes ago. Interesting, said Victoria, looking between us. Claire mentioned it was developed independently. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding, Simon said smoothly. As their direct supervisor, I naturally provided guidance, though I encouraged them to take ownership. It's how I develop my team. He smiled at me with false pride. I could have contradicted him directly, but that would have turned the meeting into a he said, she said scenario. Instead, I took a different approach. Simon has always been supportive of innovation, I said carefully. Though due to his heavy workload, we handled the technical development ourselves. But now that the concept is proven, his leadership will be valuable for the pilot program. It was a subtle maneuver. I appeared respectful while establishing that Simon had not been involved in the actual development, and now I was publicly handing him responsibility for the pilot's success. Excellent, said Victoria. Simon, you'll oversee the pilot, with Claire and Roland handling implementation. I want weekly progress reports. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. This could be exactly what we need before the shareholders' meeting next quarter. As we left the conference room, Simon placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing just slightly too hard. "My office, now," he said quietly. I followed him, maintaining a calm exterior while inwardly celebrating Phase 1 complete. I had positioned myself as indispensable to a high-visibility project that had captured the CEO's attention. Simon closed his office door and turned to me. His charm evaporated. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. "A client management system that could transform our operations," I replied innocently. "You know what I mean. You went over my head." I tilted my head slightly. "I thought you'd be pleased. The project has Victoria's attention, and you're leading the pilot. A project you never mentioned to me. Your direct supervisor." I met his gaze steadily. "I wanted to make sure it was viable before bringing it up the chain, and now it's positioned to be a major win for your department." Simon studied me, reassessing. I could see him calculating, recognizing that openly opposing the project now would look bad to Victoria. He was trapped, and he knew it. "Next time," he said finally, "you come to me first, understood?" "Of course," I agreed pleasantly. "Will you want to review the pilot methodology before we begin?" He waved dismissively. "Send me the overview. I'll sign off on it." Translation: he didn't understand the technical aspects and wouldn't bother trying to learn. "One more thing," he added as I turned to leave. "The Wilson account, I need your complete focus on turning that around. Delegate your regular clients to the junior associates if necessary." It was a petty move, trying to overwhelm me with the troubled account to ensure I'd fail somewhere. But it was also predictable. "Already ahead of you," I said. "I've scheduled meetings with the Wilson team for tomorrow and next week." He nodded, already turning to his computer. Dismissal number 2 of the week. As I walked back to my desk, Roland caught my eye from across the office and gave a subtle nod. Phase 1 had succeeded beyond our expectations. Now for Phase 2, delivering spectacular results while gathering more evidence against Simon. The Wilson account was exactly the disaster I'd anticipated. The client was a mid-sized manufacturing company that had been bounced between account managers because no one could satisfy their constantly changing demands. Their point of contact, Warren Wilson himself, son of the founder and recently appointed COO, was notoriously difficult. I spent Friday morning reviewing their file, then called Warren directly. "Mr. Wilson, this is Claire Reynolds from Helix Dynamics. I've been assigned to your account and would like to meet with you today, if possible." "Another new manager," he said irritably. "That makes what, 4 in the past year?" "Precisely why I'd like to meet in person," I replied. "I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding of your needs." He was silent for a moment, then said, "Fine. I have an hour at 2 o'clock. "Perfect, I'll come to you." The Wilson manufacturing headquarters was a 30-minute drive from our office. I arrived early and spent some time observing the facility from the parking lot. Unlike our sleek, modern office tower, their building was utilitarian, focused on function rather than aesthetics. It told me something about their priorities. Warren Wilson was a stocky man in his early 40s with a perpetual frown. He greeted me with a cursory handshake and led me to a conference room filled with binders and spreadsheets. "So," he said, sitting down, "what's Helix's new plan to disappoint us this time?" Instead of defending the company or making promises, I took out a notebook. "Before we discuss any plans, Mr. Wilson, I'd like to understand exactly what's gone wrong so far. From your perspective." He seemed surprised by the approach. "What's gone wrong? Everything. Your people promise results they can't deliver, charge us for services we don't need, and then disappear when there are problems." I nodded and continued taking notes. Specific examples would be helpful. For the next 45 minutes, I let Warren vent his frustrations in detail. I didn't interrupt or make excuses. I simply documented each complaint, asking clarifying questions when necessary. Finally, he ran out of steam and looked at me expectantly. "Well, what's your solution?" I closed my notebook. "I don't have one yet." He started to stand up, clearly annoyed. "Mr. Wilson," I continued, I could sit here and make promises like my predecessors, but that would just continue the cycle. Instead, I'm going to take everything you've told me and develop a completely new approach based on your actual needs, not what we think your needs are. And how long will that take? He asked skeptically. I'll have a preliminary plan to you by Monday morning. If you don't think it addresses your concerns, you can terminate our contract with no penalty. That got his attention. No penalty, you can authorize that. I'll make it happen. I said with more confidence than I felt. It was a calculated risk. Simon would be furious if he knew I was making such promises, but I was counting on results to speak for themselves. Warren studied me for a moment, then nodded. Monday morning, don't waste my time. I spent the entire weekend working on 2 projects simultaneously, the Wilson proposal and the client management system pilot with Roland. By Sunday night, I had a completely restructured service plan for Wilson Manufacturing that cut away all the unnecessary services they'd been charged for and focused exclusively on their core needs. I also had the beginning of a paper trail showing Simon's mismanagement of the account, evidence for my growing collection. Monday morning, I sent the proposal to Warren Wilson with a straightforward message. As promised, available to discuss at your convenience. He called within the hour. This is different, he said, and I could hear him flipping through pages. You've cut almost 30% of the services. The ones you weren't using or didn't need, I confirmed. And I've reallocated resources to the areas you identified as priorities. There was a long pause. Come by at 4, he said finally. I have some questions. Progress, not approval yet, but engagement. That was all I needed. I spent the rest of the day working with Roland on the client management system pilot. We selected 3 key clients, none of Simon's personal accounts, but all significant to the company, and began tailoring the system to their specific needs. At 3:30, I headed to Wilson Manufacturing. Warren had more questions, as expected, but they were substantive rather than accusatory. By the end of our meeting, he was cautiously optimistic. If you can deliver what's in this proposal, Ms. Reynolds, we might actually get somewhere. I can and will, I assured him. And please, call me Claire. Over the next 2 weeks, I established a pattern, mornings dedicated to the client management system pilot, afternoons focused on Wilson and my regular clients. I made sure to be visibly successful while documenting every instance where Simon attempted to take credit or create obstacles. And there were many. As the pilot program gained positive attention from Victoria and David, Simon became increasingly determined to insert himself. He scheduled unnecessary review meetings, demanded redundant reports, and tried to redirect resources away from the project. Each maneuver was meticulously documented in my black notebook, along with witness names and supporting evidence securely stored in encrypted files. The turning point came in week 3 of the pilot program. Our preliminary results showed a 65% improvement in client response metrics and a 40% reduction in redundant tasks. Victoria was impressed enough to schedule a mid-pilot review with the full executive committee. The morning of the presentation, I arrived to find Simon waiting at my desk. I'll be handling the presentation today, he said without preamble. I kept my expression neutral. That's not necessary. Roland and I have prepared everything. It's not a request. Claire, I'm the project supervisor. Of course, I said smoothly. Though you might want to review the technical specifications before the meeting, the executive committee will have detailed questions. A flash of uncertainty crossed his face. As I'd suspected, he hadn't bothered to learn the system's inner workings. Give me your presentation notes, he said. I handed him a printed copy that outlined the basic results, but omitted the technical details and implementation methodology, the very things the committee would want to know. The full documentation is on the shared drive, I added helpfully, though it's quite extensive. Simon glanced at his watch. The meeting was in 45 minutes, not enough time to review hundreds of pages of technical documentation. You'll attend as support, he decided. I'll present the strategic overview, and you can handle any technical questions. Of course, I agreed, hiding my satisfaction. It was exactly what I'd anticipated. The executive committee meeting went exactly as I'd planned. Simon presented the basic metrics confidently, taking full credit for the program's success. But when Victoria and the other executives began asking specific questions about implementation and scalability, he was forced to defer to me repeatedly. "Perhaps Claire can address the technical aspects," he said after the third question he couldn't answer. I stepped forward smoothly and delivered precise, knowledgeable responses that impressed the committee. With each question Simon couldn't answer, his authority diminished. I was careful never to undermine him directly. I didn't need to. His own lack of involvement in the project he claimed to supervise was becoming painfully apparent. By the end of the meeting, Victoria was looking at me, not Simon, when she said, "This is excellent work. I want to accelerate the timeline for full implementation." "Claire and Roland have been instrumental in the day-to-day execution," Simon said quickly, trying to save face. "Clearly," Victoria replied dryly. "I'd like you three to prepare for a full board presentation next month. Claire, please take the lead on the technical documentation." It was a subtle shift, but significant. Victoria had just positioned me as the project lead, with Simon nominally involved but functionally sidelined. "Of course, Ms. Winters," I said, "will be thoroughly prepared." As we left the meeting, Simon grabbed my arm and pulled me into an empty conference room. "What was that?" he demanded. "A successful presentation," I replied calmly. "The committee is clearly impressed with the results." "You made me look uninformed in there." I widened my eyes in feigned innocence. "I simply answered the technical questions as you directed. The documentation has been available on the shared drive since the beginning." Simon's jaw tightened. He knew he couldn't openly criticize me for being knowledgeable about a successful project. "The board presentation is critical," he said finally. "I want daily briefings on your progress. And I want to be involved in every aspect of the preparation." "Of course," I agreed. "Shall we schedule the first briefing for tomorrow morning?" He nodded curtly and left, his body language radiating frustration. Phase 2 was progressing perfectly. Simon was now trapped in a predicament of his own making. He had claimed credit for a project he didn't understand, and now he was dependent on me for its continued success. Meanwhile, the Wilson account was showing significant improvement, undermining his attempt to saddle me with a failure. But I needed more. The board presentation would be my opportunity to solidify my position. But I needed to ensure Simon couldn't steal the spotlight at the last minute. For that, I needed Phase 3, alliance building. Over the next week, I carefully expanded my network of allies. I scheduled lunch with Anita from legal, who had her own history with Simon after he blamed her for a contract issue that had been his mistake. I met with James from marketing, whose campaign ideas Simon had repeatedly claimed as his own. I even reached out to Sophia, a former Helix employee who had left after Simon had taken credit for her major client acquisition. Each conversation was casual, focused on the client management system and its potential benefits. But in each, I allowed the topic to naturally turn to Simon. I never criticized him directly. I didn't need to. I simply created space for others to share their experiences, while making mental notes of incidents I could potentially verify. By the end of the week, I had a comprehensive map of Simon's misdeeds throughout the company and a network of people who would be unsurprised by his downfall. More importantly, I had identified the perfect ally for the next stage of my plan. Rebecca Chen, a senior board member with a reputation for zero tolerance for corporate politics. Getting to Rebecca required delicacy. Board members were typically insulated from direct contact with employees at my level. However, I knew she would be attending the charity gala Helix was sponsoring that weekend, an event I'd volunteered to help organize months ago, anticipating it might prove useful. The night of the gala, I made sure to be assigned to the welcome team, greeting executives and board members as they arrived. When Rebecca appeared, elegant in a midnight blue gown, I welcomed her warmly. "Ms. Chen, welcome. I'm Claire Reynolds from Strategic Accounts." "Thank you, Claire," she said, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "I believe we have you seated at table 3, with Mr. Larson and Ms. Winters. May I show you the way?" As we walked through the crowded ballroom, I casually mentioned, I'm looking forward to presenting the new client management system to the board next month. I believe it aligns perfectly with your emphasis on operational efficiency. Rebecca glanced at me with new interest. You're part of the team developing that system? Yes, along with Roland Park from IT. It's been quite successful in the pilot phase. So I've heard, she said. Victoria mentioned it's showing impressive results. We had reached her table, but she didn't sit down immediately. Tell me, what makes this system different from our current processes? It was the opening I needed. For the next 5 minutes, I gave her a concise but comprehensive overview of the system's innovations, being careful to emphasize the business benefits rather than technical details. Rebecca listened attentively, asking sharp questions that revealed her quick grasp of the implications. Interesting, she said finally. I look forward to your presentation. It's refreshing to see innovation from within the ranks. Thank you, Ms. Chen. That means a great deal coming from you. As she took her seat, she said, If you have any preview materials ready, I'd be happy to review them before the board meeting. Sometimes these technical presentations can benefit from an advanced look. I'd appreciate that perspective, I said, containing my excitement. I'll have something sent to your office next week, if that's convenient. Perfect, she replied. I returned to my duties, carefully concealing my satisfaction. Phase 3 was proceeding even better than planned. With Rebecca's interest secured, I now had a direct line to a board member, one known for recognizing and rewarding talent regardless of title or position. The following week was a careful balancing act. I provided Simon with his requested daily briefings, which were detailed enough to appear cooperative but vague enough to keep him dependent on me for the full picture. Meanwhile, I worked with Roland to prepare a comprehensive preview package for Rebecca, one that made our individual contributions crystal clear. On Thursday, I personally delivered the package to Rebecca's assistant, having called ahead to ensure proper handling. Ms. Chen requested these materials regarding the client management system presentation. I explained to her assistant, handing over a sleek folder containing both printed materials and a USB drive with the full demonstration. Yes, she mentioned you'd be sending something over. The assistant confirmed. I'll make sure she receives it today. That same afternoon, Simon called me into his office. His expression was tense. I just got off the phone with Victoria, he said without preamble. She wants to move the board presentation up to next week. I maintained a calm exterior, though internally I was rapidly recalculating. May I ask why? Apparently, one of the board members has expressed particular interest in the system and wants to see it before she leaves for an international conference. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare display of agitation. We need to be ready by Wednesday. Rebecca. She had reviewed my materials and acted exactly as I'd hoped. That's short notice, I said, feigning concern. But I think we can manage it. Roland and I have been working ahead of schedule. Simon's eyes narrowed slightly. You seem very calm about this. I shrugged. The system works. The results are solid. We just need to organize the presentation. Which I'll be delivering, he said firmly. Of course. I agreed. Though given the technical nature of many of the questions, perhaps a joint presentation would be more effective, you covering the strategic implications, me handling the implementation details. He considered this, clearly torn between wanting full credit and avoiding technical questions he couldn't answer. Fine, he conceded finally. We'll split it, but I'll take the lead, introduce the project, and handle all the business impact sections. That makes perfect sense, I said. Shall we meet tomorrow to align on the structure? He nodded, already reaching for his phone as it began to ring. I took my cue and left, heading straight to Roland's office to share the news. Next Wednesday? Roland said, eyes widening. That's aggressive. It's perfect, I countered. Simon won't have time to fully familiarize himself with the technical aspects. He'll be dependent on us during the presentation. Roland gave me a knowing look. This isn't just about the system anymore, is it? I met his gaze steadily. It never was. Are you still with me? He considered for a moment, then nodded. All the way. He's blocked my promotion twice. But Claire, be careful. Simon has powerful allies too. I'm counting on it, I said. The higher the climb, the harder the fall. The next 5 days were a whirlwind of preparation. I worked almost around the clock, fine-tuning the presentation while simultaneously ensuring the Wilson account continued to show improvement. Sleep became a luxury, coffee a necessity. By Tuesday evening, everything was ready. The presentation was flawless, the demonstration system was functioning perfectly, and my black notebook was updated with the latest evidence of Simon's attempts to claim unearned credit. I was about to leave the office when my phone rang. It was Rebecca Chen. "Ms. Reynolds," she said when I answered. "I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all. Ms. Chen, what can I do for you?" "I wanted to let you know how impressed I was with the materials you sent over, particularly the implementation methodology section. Very innovative." "Thank you," I said, genuinely pleased by the recognition. "Roland and I have put a lot of thought into making the system both powerful and user-friendly." "Yes, your individual contributions were very clear," she said, and I could hear the significance in her tone. "I'm looking forward to tomorrow's presentation. I've encouraged the full board to attend." The full board? That was unusual for a project presentation. Typically, only the relevant committee members would attend. "We'll be thoroughly prepared," I assured her. "I'm sure you will," she replied. "Good night, Miss Reynolds." I sat at my desk for a long moment after hanging up, processing the implications. Rebecca had not only reviewed the materials, but had ensured the entire board would be present. The stakes had just been raised significantly. I sent a quick text to Roland. "Full board tomorrow. Be extra prepared." His response came immediately. "Already on it." I gathered my things and headed home, running through mental scenarios for the presentation. Tomorrow would be decisive, one way or another. I arrived at the office at 6 a.m., wanting ample time to prepare. To my surprise, Simon's office light was already on. I found him at his desk, surrounded by papers, looking like he hadn't slept. "Claire," he said, looking up as I appeared in his doorway. "Good, you're early. I've been reviewing everything, and I have some concerns about Section 3. I stepped into his office. "What concerns?" "It's too technical. The board will get lost in the details. I want to streamline it, focus more on the business outcomes." I recognized the strategy immediately. He wanted to cut the very sections that highlighted Roland's and my specific contributions. "The technical architecture is what makes those business outcomes possible," I countered. "Without explaining how the system works, the results will seem magical rather than methodical." Simon shook his head. "Trust me on this. I've presented to the board dozens of times. They want bottom-line impact, not coding details." "This board meeting is different," I said carefully. "Ms. Chen specifically requested technical information, and Victoria approved the full presentation structure yesterday." Simon's expression hardened. "I'm still the project lead, Claire. The presentation will go as I direct." I considered my options quickly. Direct confrontation would be counterproductive at this stage. "Let's compromise," I suggested. "We'll keep the technical explanations but condense them. That way, we address Ms. Chen's request while maintaining the business focus you prefer." Simon considered this, clearly reluctant but aware that time was running out. "Fine, but I want to review the final slides before the meeting." "Of course," I agreed. "I'll have them ready by noon." I left his office and went straight to Roland, who was already setting up the demonstration system in the main boardroom. "Simon wants to cut the technical sections," I told him quietly. Roland frowned. "Without those, it's just another vague business proposal." "Exactly. I've bought us some time, but we need a contingency plan." I looked around to ensure we weren't overheard. "How comfortable are you with going off script, if necessary?" Roland raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" "Just be prepared to provide technical details if I signal you, regardless of what Simon says. And make sure the full system demo is ready to go at a moment's notice." He nodded slowly. "You're expecting trouble." I'm expecting Simon to be Simon, I corrected, which means we need to be prepared for anything. The rest of the morning was spent revising slides, running through demonstrations, and coordinating with IT to ensure the boardroom systems were functioning perfectly. By noon, I had a revised presentation that appeared to address Simon's concerns while actually preserving the essential technical content, just broken into smaller, more digestible segments. Simon reviewed the slides quickly, making only minor changes. He was too preoccupied with his own opening remarks to notice the subtle ways I'd preserved our original content. At 2:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled presentation, Victoria's assistant came to find me. "Ms. Reynolds, Ms. Winters would like to see you in her office immediately." I exchanged a quick glance with Roland, who looked as surprised as I felt. "Now?" I asked. "Yes, right away." I followed her to Victoria's office, mind racing. Had Simon somehow undermined me at the last minute? Had Rebecca changed her mind? Victoria was on the phone when I entered but gestured for me to sit. She finished her call quickly and turned her attention to me. "Claire," she said without preamble, "I've just had an interesting conversation with Warren Wilson." My heart skipped a beat. The Wilson account. I'd been so focused on the presentation that I hadn't checked in with them today. "Is there a problem?" I asked carefully. To my surprise, Victoria smiled. "Quite the opposite. He submitted a formal letter praising your work and requesting that you be made their permanent account manager. He also mentioned they're considering expanding their contract significantly." Relief washed over me. "That's excellent news." "It is," Victoria agreed, particularly since Simon had informed me just last month that the account was likely unsalvageable. She studied me with new interest. "You've been quite busy, haven't you? Turning around a troubled account while simultaneously developing a groundbreaking system." I maintained a neutral expression. I believe in maximizing every opportunity. "Clearly." Victoria leaned back in her chair. "Tell me, Claire, how long have you been with Helix?" 7 years, I replied. "And you're still a senior account manager?" It wasn't a question. I met her gaze directly. "Yes." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "The board presentation begins in 10 minutes. I look forward to seeing the full scope of what you and Roland have created." She stood, signaling the end of our conversation. "Oh, and Claire, I've invited Warren Wilson to attend as well, to provide a client perspective. He should be arriving shortly." The strategic implications were clear. Victoria was setting the stage for something significant. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, standing as well. "I'll make sure he's properly welcomed." I left her office and headed straight to the boardroom, mind working rapidly. Victoria's involvement meant the presentation had taken on even greater importance. With Warren Wilson attending, there would be a direct client testimony that Simon couldn't control or claim credit for. The boardroom was already filling with board members and executives when I arrived. Simon was at the front, arranging his notes and looking tense. Roland stood by the demonstration computer, outwardly calm but with a slight nervous tap of his fingers against his leg. I made my way to Roland first. "Warren Wilson is coming," I said quietly. His eyes widened slightly. "Victoria's move." I nodded. "And she knows about the account turnaround. Simon had apparently told her it was a lost cause." Roland gave a low whistle. "The pieces are aligning." "Stay ready," I murmured, then moved to join Simon at the front. "Where have you been?" he hissed. "We're starting in 5 minutes." "Victoria wanted to see me," I replied calmly. "Warren Wilson is attending to provide a client perspective." The color drained slightly from Simon's face. "Wilson, why wasn't I informed?" "I just found out myself," I said. "Apparently, he specifically requested to be here." Before Simon could respond, the boardroom doors opened and Warren Wilson entered, accompanied by Victoria. The final board members filed in behind them, including Rebecca Chen, who gave me a subtle nod of acknowledgement. Victoria took her place at the head of the table. "Thank you all for adjusting your schedules for this presentation. As you know, we've been piloting a new client management system that shows tremendous promise. Simon Foster, Claire Reynolds, and Roland Park will be presenting today. We also have Warren Wilson from Wilson Manufacturing joining us to provide a client perspective. She nodded to Simon. Whenever you're ready, Simon. Simon stepped forward, visibly pulling himself together. Thank you, Victoria, board members, colleagues, Mr. Wilson. Thank you for your time today. I'm pleased to present a revolutionary client management system that will transform how we interact with our valued customers. He launched into his introduction smoothly, claiming strategic oversight of the project while acknowledging Roland and me as the implementation team. It was a masterful display of corporate credit stealing, subtly positioning himself as the visionary while relegating us to mere executors of his vision. Under normal circumstances, it would have worked perfectly. But these were not normal circumstances. When Simon concluded his introduction and turned to me for the implementation details, I stepped forward with confident purpose. Thank you, Simon. Before I dive into the technical architecture, I'd like to address why we developed this system in the first place. I clicked to a slide that wasn't in Simon's approved deck, a slide showing client satisfaction metrics over the past 3 years. As you can see, despite our growth, client satisfaction has been declining in key areas. Response time, problem resolution, and personalized service have all suffered as we've scaled. Simon shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that I was off script but unable to interrupt without seeming unprepared. This system was born from direct client feedback, I continued, nodding toward Warren Wilson. Clients like Wilson Manufacturing helped us identify the gaps in our current processes and imagine a better way forward. Warren nodded approvingly, and several board members leaned forward with increased interest. I proceeded to walk through the system's architecture, carefully balancing technical detail with business implications. At strategic moments, I brought Roland in to demonstrate specific features, creating a seamless partnership that highlighted our command of the project. Simon tried twice to reclaim control, interjecting with statements like, "As I directed the team early on, and building on my initial concept," but each attempt fell flat against the obvious depth of knowledge Roland and I displayed. The turning point came when Rebecca Chen asked a pointed question. Who specifically developed the unified client dashboard? It's quite innovative. Before Simon could respond, Roland spoke up. That was Claire's design. She recognized that our clients needed a single view of all interactions rather than having to navigate multiple systems. Simon's jaw tightened visibly. With my guidance, of course, he added quickly. Rebecca's gaze shifted between us, clearly noting the tension. And the predictive service needs algorithm that could save us millions in proactive client retention. Roland developed that, I said immediately. His background in data science was instrumental. Simon was now glaring openly, but we had the board's full attention. Victoria's expression was unreadable, but she made no move to intervene. When we finished the formal presentation, Victoria opened the floor for questions. The first came from David Larson. The pilot results are impressive, he said. But how confident are you in scalability across all client types? Simon started to answer with a generic assurance, but I smoothly interjected. We've actually analyzed that specifically, I said, clicking to another slide Simon hadn't reviewed. This chart shows projected scalability across our 5 client categories. As you can see, the system architecture accommodates varying needs without custom coding for each client, a key improvement over our current approach. The questions continued for 20 minutes, with Roland and I fielding most of them while Simon grew increasingly sidelined. Finally, Victoria turned to Warren Wilson. Mr. Wilson, you've had a chance to see the system in action as part of the pilot. What's your perspective as a client? Warren leaned forward. Frankly, until Ms. Reynolds took over our account, we were considering terminating our relationship with Helix. The service was inconsistent, the communication poor, and we never felt our needs were truly understood. Simon shifted uncomfortably as Warren continued. This new system, combined with Ms. Reynolds' approach, has completely transformed our experience. We now have transparency into every aspect of our relationship with Helix. Response times have improved dramatically. And for the first time, we feel like a valued partner, rather than just another account number. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. And you attribute this improvement to both the system and Ms. Reynolds's management? Absolutely. Warren confirmed. In fact, we're now considering expanding our contract to include additional services, something we wouldn't have contemplated 3 months ago. The implication was clear to everyone in the room. A troubled account that Simon had essentially written off was now poised for significant growth under my management. Rebecca Chen spoke next. I'm curious about the development timeline. How long has this system been in development? This was the question I'd been waiting for, the opening to reveal Simon's lack of involvement without directly accusing him. Roland and I began conceptualizing the system approximately 1 year ago, I said carefully. We developed it initially as a theoretical improvement, working evenings and weekends to refine the concept. Once we had a viable prototype, we presented it to Victoria and David, who authorized the pilot program. Simon has been supervising the pilot phase for the past month. The timeline was now clear to everyone. Roland and I had developed the system independently, long before Simon became involved. Victoria's gaze sharpened. A year ago? This wasn't part of an officially sanctioned project? No, I confirmed. It was an independent initiative driven by client feedback and our own observations about system inefficiencies. Rebecca looked directly at Simon. So your involvement began with the pilot program, correct? Simon's expression was tightly controlled. I've been aware of their efforts throughout, he said vaguely. As their supervisor, I naturally provided guidance and direction. Rebecca's skepticism was palpable. Interesting. The technical architecture seems remarkably cohesive for something developed piecemeal with occasional supervision. It was a polite but unmistakable challenge to Simon's claim of involvement. Several board members exchanged glances. Victoria stepped in smoothly. Well, regardless of the development process, the results speak for themselves. The board will need to deliberate on full implementation. But I believe we can all agree that Claire and Roland have created something of significant value to Helix. She looked directly at me. Well done. The meeting concluded shortly after, with board members stopping to ask Roland and me additional questions as they left. Simon disappeared quickly, not bothering to acknowledge either of us. As the room emptied, Victoria approached with Rebecca Chen beside her. Claire, Roland, excellent presentation, Victoria said. Rebecca and I would like to discuss next steps with you tomorrow morning. My office, 9 a.m. We'll be there, I confirmed, maintaining professional composure despite the internal surge of triumph. After they left, Roland turned to me with a mixture of awe and amusement. That was surgical, he said quietly. Simon never knew what hit him. Phase 3 complete, I replied, allowing myself a small smile. But we're not done yet. The next morning, I arrived at Victoria's office precisely at 9 a.m. Roland beside me. Rebecca Chen was already there, along with David Larson and Anita from legal. Victoria wasted no time on preliminaries. Based on yesterday's presentation and the pilot results, the board has unanimously approved full implementation of the client management system, she announced. Furthermore, they've authorized a new division to oversee its development and expansion. My heart quickened, but I kept my expression professional. That's excellent news. Indeed, Victoria agreed. The question now is leadership. Rebecca has some thoughts on that. Rebecca leaned forward. Claire, Roland, your work on this system has been exceptional. But what impressed me even more was your initiative in identifying a significant company problem and developing a solution independently. She glanced at Victoria, who nodded for her to continue. The board believes this system represents not just a technological advancement, but a new strategic direction for Helix. We want to create a client experience division that will oversee both the technical implementation and the development of new client-centered processes. David Larson spoke next. We're offering you both leadership positions in this new division, Roland as Chief Technology Officer and Claire as Division President, reporting directly to Victoria. The offer was beyond anything I'd anticipated. Division president would place me on the executive leadership team, multiple levels above Simon. That's a significant promotion, I said carefully. It is, Victoria acknowledged. But you've demonstrated both the technical vision and the leadership capabilities required. The Wilson account transformation was particularly telling. You took what Simon had classified as a problem client and turned it into a growth opportunity. At the mention of Simon, I finally asked the question I'd been holding back. And what about Simon Foster? The executives exchanged glances. It was Anita who answered. Mr. Foster's performance is being reviewed, she said with professional neutrality. There are some discrepancies in his management reports that have come to light. Victoria's expression was grim. To be blunt, it appears Simon has been taking credit for others' work while shifting blame for failures. The Wilson account is just one example. We're conducting a thorough investigation. Rebecca added. Your presentation yesterday prompted several employees to come forward with their own experiences. The pattern is concerning. I thought of my black notebook, filled with meticulously documented incidents. I could provide it now, delivering the final blow to Simon's career. It would be the perfect culmination of my revenge plan, to not only rise above him, but to actively participate in his downfall. But looking at the faces around me, I realized it wasn't necessary. Simon had built his own trap over years of manipulation and credit stealing. My success had simply exposed what was already there. I understand, I said finally. Regarding the division offer, Roland and I would need to discuss the details. But speaking for myself, I'm very interested. Roland nodded his agreement. As am I. Victoria smiled. Excellent. Anita will prepare the formal offers, and we can discuss transition plans later this week. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Congratulations to you both. This is well-deserved. As Roland and I left Victoria's office, we maintained professional composure until we reached the privacy of the stairwell. Division President, Roland said, grinning. That's what I call karma. I allowed myself a genuine smile. CTO suits you as well. We make a good team. We do, he agreed. Though I'm curious, did you plan all this from the beginning? The new division? The dual promotions? I considered the question. Not exactly. I knew the system had potential, and I knew Simon was vulnerable. But this... I shook my head slightly. This exceeded even my expectations. So what happens now? Roland asked. With Simon, I mean. Now we focus on building something excellent, I replied. Simon's fate is in his own hands. But even as I said it, I knew Simon Foster would not survive the investigation. His career at Helix was effectively over. The revenge I had so carefully orchestrated had succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. 3 days later, the official announcement went out. Claire Reynolds and Roland Park would lead the newly formed Client Experience Division, effective immediately. Simon Foster would be pursuing other opportunities. I was given Simon's corner office, the one with the view of the city skyline that I had coveted for so long. As I arranged my belongings on the expansive desk, I found myself thinking about the long journey that had brought me here. 7 years of hard work, 3 years of careful documentation, 1 year of strategic planning, and finally, 1 perfect execution. My phone buzzed with a text from Roland. Celebration dinner tonight? I smiled and replied, absolutely, we've earned it. As I looked out at the skyline, I thought about Simon cleaning out his office somewhere in the building. There was no satisfaction in imagining his humiliation. That had never been the point. The point had been justice, the restoration of meritocracy, the recognition of true value. My revenge hadn't been about destroying Simon Foster. It had been about building something better in the space he had occupied, something that actually served our clients and recognized the contributions of those who did the real work. Warren Wilson called later that afternoon to congratulate me on the promotion. I knew you were going places, he said, but I didn't expect it to happen quite so dramatically. I laughed. Neither did I, to be honest. Well, Helix finally got something right, he replied. By the way, We're ready to sign that expanded contract whenever you're ready. I'll have the paperwork to you tomorrow. I promised. After we hung up, I opened my desk drawer and took out the black notebook that had been my constant companion for 3 years. I flipped through pages of detailed notes, dates, incidents, and evidence. A meticulous record of Simon's manipulations and my patient response. For a moment, I considered keeping it, a trophy of sorts from a battle well fought. But that would be Simon's approach, not mine. Instead, I dropped it into the shredder beside my desk, watching as the pages disappeared. I didn't need it anymore. The past was prologue, and the future was mine to write. Victoria stopped by my office late in the day. "Settling in?" she asked, glancing around the newly arranged space. "Yes, thank you," I replied. "I'm already working on implementation timelines for the full system rollout." She nodded approvingly. "That's what I expected." She paused, studying me with shrewd eyes. "You know, I've been watching you for some time, Claire. Your patience is remarkable." I met her gaze steadily. "I believe in playing the long game." "Clearly," she said with the ghost of a smile. "It's a valuable quality in leadership. Not many people have it." "I learned from observation," I said carefully. "Both positive and negative examples." Victoria nodded, understanding the unspoken reference to Simon. "The best lessons often come from seeing what not to do." She turned to leave, then added, "The executive committee meets on Thursdays at 2 p.m. I'll expect you there from now on." "I'll be prepared," I assured her. After she left, I turned back to the window, watching as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city. In the reflection of the glass, I could see myself, no longer the overlooked employee, but the woman who had orchestrated her own rise through a combination of excellence, strategy, and perfect timing. The revenge had never really been about Simon. It had been about claiming what I had earned, what had been rightfully mine all along. The fact that Simon had fallen in the process was simply the natural consequence of truth coming to light. My phone buzzed again. A message from Lydia, Victoria's assistant. "Congratulations on the promotion. Not surprised at all. Some of us have been waiting for this day for years." I smiled at the reminder that I had never been as invisible as Simon had assumed. The quiet ones, the observers, the diligent workers. We see everything. We remember everything. And sometimes, when the moment is right, we act. That evening, as Roland and I celebrated over dinner, he raised his glass in a toast. "To the new client experience division," he said, "and to the sweet taste of justice." I clinked my glass against his. "To building something better than what came before." "You know," Roland said thoughtfully, "in all our planning, I never asked, what would you have done if it hadn't worked? If Simon had somehow outmaneuvered us?" I considered the question. I would have tried again. Different approach, same goal. Patient persistence usually wins in the end. Roland nodded. "That's why you succeeded where others failed against him. You were playing a different game entirely." "Not different," I corrected. "Just longer." I smiled. The corporate world rewards quick victories and dramatic gestures, but the real power lies in quiet strategy and perfect execution. "Well," Roland said, raising his glass again, "here's to your perfect execution, Claire Reynolds, Division President." I raised my own glass, thinking of the long journey behind and the promising path ahead. And to whatever comes next. The following Monday, I arrived at my new office early, as was my habit. A stack of congratulatory cards waited on my desk, along with meeting requests from department heads eager to align with the new division. Among them was a small envelope with no name. Inside was a single note card with elegant handwriting. "The best revenge isn't just success, it's success with witnesses. Well played. R.C. Rebecca Chen." The board member had recognized my strategy for what it was and approved. I tucked the card into my desk drawer and turned to my computer. There was work to do. A division to build, a system to implement. The revenge was complete. But the true victory lay ahead, in creating something of lasting value that would make Simon Foster's brief reign a forgotten footnote in the company's history. As employees began arriving for the day, I could feel curious glances directed at my office. The story had spread throughout Helix, how the quiet, overlooked Claire Reynolds had suddenly emerged as a powerhouse, leapfrogging multiple levels to join the executive team. How Simon Foster, once considered untouchable, had been exposed and removed. How a new era was beginning. I met their gazes calmly, with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly how she had arrived at this moment, through excellence, evidence, and exquisite timing. The first executive committee meeting on Thursday was a formality of sorts, an introduction to my new peers and a high-level discussion of quarterly goals. But as I presented the implementation plan for the client management system, I could see respect in their eyes. Not the wary calculation that had often greeted Simon, but genuine professional respect. In the weeks that followed, I heard that Simon had taken a position with a smaller competitor, a significant step down from his role at Helix. I felt no need to track his career or witness his diminishment. My focus was entirely forward-facing. 6 months later, the client management system was fully implemented across all Helix accounts. Client satisfaction scores had risen by 43%, and employee retention had improved significantly now that credit was properly assigned for work done. Roland thrived as CTO, finally able to innovate freely without having his ideas appropriated. We maintained our effective partnership, each respecting the other's domain while collaborating seamlessly on shared initiatives. 1 year to the day after my promotion, Victoria called me into her office. David Larson was there, along with Rebecca Chen. The client experience division has exceeded all projections, Victoria said without preamble. The board is extremely pleased. Thank you, I replied. The team has worked exceptionally hard. Indeed, Rebecca agreed, but leadership sets the tone, and yours has been exemplary. Victoria leaned forward. Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting. David has decided to retire at the end of the quarter. I glanced at David, who nodded confirmation. We need a new chief financial officer, Victoria continued. Someone with strategic vision and proven leadership capabilities. The board would like to offer you the position. CFO, another step up, another expansion of influence. I'm honored, I said carefully, but my background isn't in finance. Your background is in solving complex problems and building effective systems, Rebecca countered. The financial aspects can be learned. The leadership qualities you've demonstrated are far rarer. I considered the offer. It was unexpected, but not unwelcome. I would want to ensure the client experience division remains a priority, I said finally. Of course, Victoria agreed. You've built something too valuable to neglect. You would retain oversight while moving into the broader CFO role. I nodded slowly. Then I accept, with gratitude. As I left that meeting, I reflected on how far I had come from the day I'd opened that small black notebook and begun documenting Simon's misdeeds. What had started as a quest for justice, for revenge, had evolved into something far more significant. I had transformed not just my own career, but Helix itself. The corner office with the view that I had once coveted now seemed like a small thing compared to the impact I was having on the company's direction and culture. The revenge against Simon, once so central to my planning, was now a distant memory, a necessary step on a much longer journey. That evening, as I worked late finalizing the transition plan for my new role, I realized something profound. The best revenge isn't destroying your enemy or even taking their place. It's creating something so much better in their absence that they become irrelevant. A cautionary tale rather than a continuing threat. Simon Foster had been forgotten at Helix, his name rarely mentioned except as a negative example in management training sessions. Meanwhile, I had built a legacy of positive change that would outlast any individual career, including my own. And that, I decided as I looked out at the city lights, was the sweetest revenge of all. Not just success, but meaningful success that made the original injury seem insignificant in comparison. My phone buzzed with a text from Roland. Heard the news, CFO Reynolds has a nice ring to it. I smiled and typed back, just the next step in building something that matters. Because in the end, that's what my revenge had truly been about. Not tearing down, but building up. Not destroying a career, but creating a legacy. Not playing Simon's game of corporate politics, but changing the game entirely. Sometimes the quiet ones, the watchers, the patient planners, we don't just win the game, we rewrite the rules. And that's a victory that lasts.